With the development of society, people's demand for better communities have become stronger and stronger. No matter what level of governments, our government officials are suffering much more pressure than before. In order to meet people's increasing requirements, municipal government should find some ways to generate more and more revenues and cut down expenditures to afford increasing costs of goods and services and avoid running out of money. Adjusting tax rates or services charges are typical ways for government to generate more revenues. However, people are more willing to accept the changes of charges rather than tax rate adjustment. Millions and Williams' recent research uses double trend to explain that people have more aversion to taxes than charges, because charges connect with apparent goods and services. And people who use a specific good or services should pay for that, and others who don't use the specific good or services do not need to pay for that. Morgan and Palmer made a survey in 1993. This survey tells that more than 87% of cities increased or added their user fees in order to get more revenues. Some policy questions always come with changes of charges. One of these policy questions is account structure. Before making any changes of charges, we should know whether this charge is in the general fund or enterprise fund. The Government Accounting Standard Board's Statement Number 34 presents state and local governments' report on the value of their capital assets and infrastructure assets, and explain that major difference between enterprise fund and accounting and general fund accounting. Enterprise fund use economic resources measurements focuses in actual basis of accounting to report short-term assets, long-term assets, liabilities, and the net supplies or deficit funds. Government use enterprise fund to establish a separate account and financial reporting mechanism for their business type services, such as public water facility, airport, and ambulance services. But general funds use financial resources measurement focuses and modify accrual accounting to report short-term assets, liability, and aggregate net supply or deficit without distinguish the net costs of individual function from whole funds. The following form is about advantages and disadvantages of enterprise fund. Enterprise funds are helpful to increase revenues and reduce government's reliance on taxes, and different governments prefer to charge for different goods and services. Government use enterprise funds to establish a separate account and a financial reporting mechanism for their business type services, such as public utility, healthcare, recreation, and transportation. But enterprise funds don't include normal government operations and services such as highway maintenance and housing and community development. Like we mentioned, revenues from charges and expenditures are separate from revenues and our expenditures for other government activities. This practice makes it easier for financial managers to track enterprise funds, such as costs, revenues, and demands. The balance sheet and measures of financial success of government enterprise makes these government financial transaction reports similar to some private sector accounting, and also help governments supply management and taxpayer information, the impact of financial decisions, the cost of providing services, and subsidies from the general fund in providing services. The adoption of enterprise fund should get approval from mayor or town council. When an enterprise fund starts to work, the enterprise budget should be estimated. An enterprise fund budget includes revenues of this project and all expenditures of this project. And sometimes it includes changes in net assets. Enterprise revenues should contain user charges and fees, investment income, and all other enterprise revenues. And all of these revenues must be used for supporting this project and cannot be spent on any municipal operations or subsidize government's general funds. The costs include direct costs, indirect costs, debt services, and capital expenditure. In order to find out whether the enterprise fund is positive or negative at each end of the year, the enterprise fund should be assessed. If the performance of enterprise fund is positive, the retained earning will be used as a preparation for emergency reserve for next year, and the director of accounts should submit a balance sheet about that. If the performance is negative, it means deficit exists in the enterprise fund, and the situation should be considered in the next year's budget. Also, there's another special cost, depreciation. This shouldn't be considered in the operation budget. It should be taken into consideration when making the cost analysis of charges and fees and annual expense. From an enterprise fund budget, the community should take tabs on the use of user changes and fees in operations and consider whether they should use taxes or other revenues to subsidize the deficit of the enterprise fund. In this presentation, I used two case studies to explain my topic. The number one is King County Water Quality Enterprise Fund. King County Water Quality Enterprise Fund is an important self-sufficient example of providing wastewater treatment services through charges and user fees to retrieve the full expenditure of these supplies. This figure shows a clear increase from financial year 2009 to financial year 2011 by 562.4 million and 588.1 million respectively. For the total assets, there are 4,062.1 million, which were used to supply treatment plants, pumping and regulator stations, interceptors, and other equipment at the end of financial year 2011. And 3,859 million were used for capital assets such as providing collection and treatment for wastewater. Also, figure 2 present total net assets and increasing from 543.8 million to 588.1 million. They cut down the net asset invested in capital assets from 410.6 million to 298 million. The reduction of construction work in process increased the value of the plant in services and depreciation expense, and increased the loss on disposal and impairment of capital assets. This figure represents enterprise budget, such as changes and fees in assets, assessment of revenues, operation expenses, and changes in net assets, which is the same as mentioned before. The King County Enterprise Fund budget statements shows a clear image of changes for each expense in program. As we know, the socio-economic condition is a significant factor which may influence the changes of expenses. Because the statement shows the price of polymer, caustic soda, sodium hypochlorite, and cable increased, and the expenses for chemical increased, and also the increases of labor costs leads to the services expenses increases. As mentioned before, the JASB is involved in developing accounting and financial standards for state and local government. JASB required this financial statement to supply information to the community, and the community can keep tabs on the use of user charges and fees in operations, and consider whether they should use taxes or other revenues to offset the deficit of the enterprise fund. In this case, both Figure 3 and Figure 4 address a positive revenues and cash flows in operations. Combined with JASB Statement Number 34, the statement is effective for reporting, and water quality has ability to evaluate the impact of adoption of these standards on these financial statements. The next case study is Kansas Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund. The Kansas Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund is an enterprise fund which connects with statements of revenues, expenditures, changes in net assets, and cash flows, and assists to establish Kansas wastewater treatment facility. The finances for the fund are separate from other state funds and wastewater treatment operations like a business entity. The Figure 5 shows that a fluctuation exists in net assets. Total assets, total liabilities, and total net assets increased from financial year 2010 to financial year 2011, and then decreased from financial year 2011 to financial year 2012. In Kansas Water Pollution Control Revolving Program, all assets are restricted with the conditions of grants and bonds. The Figure 6 provides information for tracking all enterprise funds and helps to supply management with information about measurement of performance, the impact of financial decisions, the cost of providing services, and subsets from the general fund in providing a service. It evidences that sufficient resources have been produced in financial year 2011. The total revenue decreased 409,612 from financial year 2010 to financial year 2011 due to the decrease of bond reserved funds and other investment funds. Although other invested funds still decreased greatly, the total revenue turned to increase from financial year 2011 to financial year 2012. This kind of fluctuation also exists in the net assets. At the end of financial year 2011, the total assets increased 23,044,099. But at the end of the financial year 2012, the total assets decreased to 277,973,357 because of increase of administration expenses. The fund's operations expenses increased by more than 28%. The Figure 7 indicates some increases exist in cash flow. At the end of financial year 2011, the net increase in cash is 44,738,326. At the end of financial year 2012, the net increase in cash is 90,580,036. The increases provide that there is a sufficient cash to meet the requirement for operations. A new financial reporting model includes the net cost of each government function and program, such as the revenues and expenditures. Government always uses model to make government-wide financial statement. Also, the government has options to supply indirect expenses and depreciation. If the government wants to supply indirect expenses, the information should be put in a separate column to calculate the total cost of a specific function. If the government wants to report depreciation, the government should have assets management system and documents which can demonstrate that the government devotes itself to maintaining its infrastructure at or above a condition level disclosed by government. The above two cases uses new financial model to demonstrate the adoption of enterprise funds in financing their water reclamation facilities. Both of these projects provide the statement of net assets, the statement of revenues, expenses, changes, and the statements of cash flow. Enterprise funds can decrease the reliance on changing taxes, reduce the burden on government's general funds, provide flexible ways to improve operations, keep the supplies or retained earning to help fund future capital expenditures, and prevent town officials from taking a predatory action against the water department revenues. Meanwhile, communities will have overall review of the enterprise budget. The government will supply better goods and services to the public, and the financial manager will keep better track of costs, demands, and revenues, connect with functions, and make better decisions about future plan.